Air travel has been one of the most innovative discoveries of man in the 20th century. Our ability to get from one point to another faster than ever is a luxury that is now available due to innovative people like the Wright Brothers. But air travel has not been smooth sailing in the least. It has been marked by some of the worst accidents that have claimed the lives of many people. Some accidents have been so tragic that it has marked a turning point in the standards of safety in the aviation industry. And one such horrifying accident was the crash of Japan Airlines Flight 123 in the year 1985. What happened all those years ago that caused Flight 123 to fall out of the sky? Let's find out together. The morning of August 12, 1985 would mark a routine day at the Tokyo airport with many passengers both boarding and getting off from aircraft. No one would realize that this day would be soon marked as one of the darkest days in Japan's aviation history. What would begin as a routine flight for Flight 123 from Tokyo's Haneda Airport to Osaka's Itami Airport would soon turn into a nightmare for those on board Flight 123 of Japan Airlines. Flight 123 was no ordinary flight either. Being one of the largest passenger flights of the time, it required not only a highly experienced crew, but also a well-maintained hull and mechanism to ensure that the flight ran smoothly. A later post-mortem analysis of the airplane would bring to light that the plane was in fact not maintained the way it was supposed to be. The plane was to be flown by Acting Captain Yutaka Sasaki and Captain Masami Takahama, along with the engineer of the flight, Hiroshi Fukuda. Yutaka Sasaki was an experienced pilot with nearly 4,000 hours under his name, and was scheduled to succeed Masami Takahama in operating the Boeing 747 that had been operated by Masami for well over a decade at that point. The flight would be a very short but special one to Sasaki, as this was the final flight that would determine his competency to take over Takahama's position. Fukuda, on the other hand, was no stranger to the plane either. He had over 1,000 hours under his belt and was well acclimated to the plane. The three would be scheduled to take the plane on its usual route. Fukuda would accompany the plane for the first two trips, first from Sapporo and then from Fukuoka with no hitch. For the final trip of the day, the flight crew who flew the first two trips would swap out with Sasaki and Takahama. Once everything was checked, all 505 passengers and 12 cabin crew were loaded in. The crew would taxi the vehicle onto the runway at 6:04 p.m. and would be green-lighted to take off. Little did they know that this would be the last time they would be seen alive by anyone on the ground. The flight took off at 6:12 p.m. and started to climb to its normal cursing altitude of 24,000 feet. The plane would begin its normal routine of pressurizing the cabin inside so that the air inside the body of the plane was breathable to everyone by sucking in air from the engine during its climb and filtering it into the cabin. Little did the crew know that this process that the plane had undergone several thousand times was unknowingly adding to the cause of their demise. Years before the final flight of the plane, the tail end of the plane had landed hard during one of the routine landings, causing the bulkhead, a U-shaped structure that held the pressurized air inside the cabin, to sustain serious damage. The damage was so severe that the plane was grounded and scheduled to be repaired. However, the extensive repairs that were conducted did not repair the bulkhead completely. Every time the plane went under the routine procedure of pressurizing the cabin, the damaged bulkhead kept getting more and more cracked and damaged with the pressurized air pressing against it, and the final flight would be the last time the bulkhead would be able to hold up against this pressure. The bulkhead would finally give in to the pressure and crumble, making the pressurized air rip through the tailhead of the plane to escape into the low pressure of the atmosphere. This explosion would cause the plane's auxiliary power unit, rudder, and other components to get blown out as well. The crew would immediately try and turn the vehicle around and land back at the Tokyo airport, but the blown-out hydraulics of the plane would not allow them to even steer the plane in any direction. The plane would enter a wild spin as the pilots lost all control due to the failed hydraulics. The plane would enter a Dutch roll and start moving in an erratic manner called a phugoid motion. The entire crew and all the passengers would begin to become nauseated and try and keep their senses about them, as the plane rapidly climbed, descended, and swayed side to side. The captain, first officer, and engineer would be completely in the dark as to how bad the damage was, and would soon realize that what they were dealing with was not as simple as an engine failure or faulty components. The captain and first officer realized that if they were to ensure at least a controlled crash, they had to descend as soon as possible But as expected, even after pushing against the controls, the plane would not budge. In a last-ditch effort, they would try controlling the plane using the engine power alone, but the uncontrolled path of the plane would take them straight into a mountain range. The crew, to keep the plane out of the range, would increase the thrust to the max, which would send the plane into a climb that risked them stalling and falling out of the sky. But the subsequent powering down would send the plane into such a nosedive that they would restore power to the engines to avoid having an encounter with the mountain. The next climb would make the crew realize that they wouldn't be able to continue this pattern indefinitely, so they started looking for other solutions to gain some control over the plane. They would realize that the plane's flaps could be extended for some extra control, but this, while giving some temporary relief, would spin out of control. As the flaps continued to extend beyond what the crew had hoped, the plane would begin to tip over and aim itself into the mountain range, and the crew instinctively would try and use the failed control sticks to gain control, but to no avail. The plane would begin dropping at 18,000 feet per minute and hit the tree line of the Nagano Mountains, and the plane would burst and erupt into flames. Air traffic control, who was trying to help the crew this entire time, would realize that their worst fears had come to pass, and the plane had crashed. Once the Japanese military had confirmed that the plane had indeed crashed, they readied a rescue team to go to the crash site in the morning, as they believed that no one would have survived such a crash, which was one of the biggest mistakes on the part of the Japanese government to this day concerning this crash. The crash, against all odds, would have 4 survivors who all recounted tales of that horrible evening, but the detail that they mentioned that would stand out the most was that they weren't the only ones who initially survived the crash. They were able to see and hear other survivors shouting out to their loved ones and asking where they were before their voices slowly started to become silent. Flight 123 would be such a turning point for the Japanese aviation industry that their safety standards are now some of the best in the whole world. What do you think could have been done to prevent this horrible tragedy? Let us know in the comments section. So, if you have enjoyed this video exploring the tragic tale of Flight 123, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more.